This was a heavy text, all in all. You know, it's an academic text for sure, and it's heavy, heavy, heavy on vocab and like super wordy, and very much, I guess, Ron put me on a little bit to the discussion of last week and how it was just like harder to get through a heavier ideology, right? I think especially because nowadays more contemporary ideology is written in a way that places you, the reader, in it, right? Whereas like that's not necessarily what we're dealing with here with this text. So I just want to affirm what Ron already named for us last week, which is that if you're feeling that way, you're not the only one, right? Like it's a heavy text. Some of us didn't finish tonight, and that's fine, because even if you didn't finish the full text, respectfully, I think we get the gist. I think we understand that Frantz is naming a deep-rooted evil in identifying through colonization, right? And in this case, what he's naming is that like Black folk have identified through colonization for a long time. And if that continues, then the idea is that like Black folk will never have a sense of culture, right? True culture. So that's sort of like the wrap of that. But is there anything that's sticking out to folks? I did want to talk about his little quote, the state of the Negro. But before we get into what he talks about, what being the state of Blackness is, I'm curious, did anyone read anything that made them feel like, oh, I'd love to share this? Or maybe you have thoughts around how wordy it was, and how it was difficult.
The one thing that kind of struck me is, even though this is supposed to be, more about Black identity and what I assumed would be the empowerment of Black people, it's really as critical of Black people, particularly within his Martinique community, and that I wasn't, I shouldn't say Black people, but Black men, and going into it, that I wasn't expecting as much of. But it does fit, because we have to kind of explore ourselves if patriarchy is existing within a community. You have to examine that as much as you have to examine how it manifests in the greater world and society.
Yeah, and I see in the chat, Alexis named cognitive dissonance is real. I was expecting more self-awareness, which I think is like similar to sort of the notes that you're making, Ron. Yeah. And again, us remembering that I think part of the fun of this book is reimagining or sort of dreaming about what it can look like for Fanon to be in a present day sort of ideology, understanding like his own homophobia and his own misogyny and how it works against maybe some of the theories and ideologies he's trying to write and share. I think that's part of our privilege in this space, is that we get to play with that or be extra critical with that. So like, that's a great point, Anyone else? I also want to ask, just to expand a little bit, because we've already named that like the book kind of felt tight in certain ways. And I don't know if folks think that they have to have like a right answer, but you don't. Does he remind you of anyone, of any character you've encountered before, any sort of ideology or teaching you've come across, anything else you've read?
I mean, I noticed this from when we started reading it, and I'm going to keep it very brief because I admittedly don't read about this ideology. It seems like he heavily influences or has influenced Afro-pessimism. And I purposely don't read about Afro-pessimism because, quite frankly, it's not my business. I mean, it's from what I understand of it, it's just how Black people are choosing to see themselves in the world. And in that case, it's referring to the Black person as the slave, or referring to themselves as the slave, present tense. Mm-hmm. And I see a lot of that language here, and I'm when I first read it a couple of years ago, I didn't know anything about it. And now I'm like, oh, maybe he probably influenced a lot of that ideology, which is popular in some circles of Black academic thought of Afro-pessimism, just by the way he refers to the idea of how the Black person views themselves, and using the slave not as just this past tense word, but still using it in the present tense, even if the present tense in this case is what, 60s or whatever it was.
Right. That's an excellent point. Thank you, Greg. And I think it connects to what Ron was naming earlier around sort of that critique, that self-critique of the community. I think this play of Afro-pessimism fits into that. So that's a great connection. Look at y'all. Anything else? Anything else standing out to folks?
Well, I'll say in kind of response to your first question about like how do we find the book and how are we feeling getting to this point. I found the book really hard to read. And it's one of the few books that I didn't read every, like every week we had this many chapters to read. Maybe I read the first chapter of the 5 chapters or the 2 chapters or whatever, it's like, I just kept giving up. I felt like it was like a chore, and I'm not like that. I love what we read, and I love getting into it. And it felt like I had to drag myself to pick it up again and to pick it up again. And I think that had something to do with what, of how the language and how psychoanalytic it was. I mean, just it's like a whole other world of how you look at people in the world, and it felt very alienating. And the other thing is, it was almost like I loved reading the last chapter of the book. I was like, oh my God, finally, he's writing in a non-abstract way. Like finally, he's being political. Finally his language where he says, why did I, so this is what I'm telling you, this is what I've written, laid down in this book. And this is why. And I know people are going to have a hard time with it. And this is what I think. And I found it really riveting, the last chapter. Like I have all these sections wow, he's saying this. Wow, he's saying that. It's very understandable. It was for me, it was very understandable and very kind of like his conclusions. And it was like the whole book, I kept waiting, like, when is he going to say what he thinks?
Yeah.
It's like, this is what Monuni says. And then this is what Lacan says. And then this is what this other one says. And Adler says. And like, he's kind of refuting all of these analyses that have been made about, I guess about, colonial people, like these are all like, well, in some ways it was French writers, but then other ones weren't French, Adler's American. But I kept saying, so when is he going to say what he thinks? And that's where in the last chapter, I felt like that's where he finally says what he thinks. And I was very impacted by what he said there.
Thank you, Anais. Yeah, I feel like that's a super accurate description of the ending, particularly because chapter 6 feels so heavily socio-psychological. Yeah, like a lot of his theory and a lot of what he's putting out there. And then I think I wrote down, over here, I think I have, I copy and pasted the line that I really loved from the last chapter. Ooh, but it's long as hell. I'm gonna shorten it as much as possible. He's basically toward the end of the book naming he wants Black folks and white people to turn their backs on the inhuman voices which were those of their respective ancestors in order that authentic communication is possible. Right. And I thought that was like a very beautiful, poetic, and yes, kind of sad and alienating notion, but a strong notion, the idea of like turning your back on the narrative or the stories that started you in order to maybe being something greater. And I feel like that spoke to me poetically, that little line. Yes, so I really, really agree. Any other thoughts? Any other ideas coming up? Maybe it has nothing to do with this book or this character. I mean, this character, this person, but anything coming up for folks?
One of the things I had mentioned last week was the masculinity, how he has centered masculinity to the point where he rarely even mentions, where I haven't read through the end of the book, but where he rarely even mentions, you know, the role that women play, you know, one in his place of origin, Martinique, but also that greater, again, looking at his role in the greater society of, you know, of fighting in World War II, living in North Africa, also living in France. You know, he tends to kind of ignore the role of women, even, you know, even if it's just within his personal life. You know, it feels like he tends to ignore that role. I don't want to say toxic masculinity, but you know, that's probably what it was.
Why don't you want to say it, Ron? No. No, I'm playing with you.
know, no, that's all right. I'm not giving him a pass on his ideas as much as he probably felt that was the norm then, which is, you know, even though it's the norm, it is toxic masculinity. He is kind of centering himself and other men to the almost universal or 100% exclusion of women. So that is toxic. I mean, he knows women exist. So I don't know what that was about.
Well, it's patriarchy. You know, in patriarchy, it centers men, and women are subsumed, and women don't count. And who runs the world, and for whom the world is run, is men, and women are insignificant. You know, and we know not, you know, what's happening right now, Roe versus Wade, and when women could not, you know, sign a contract, have a bank account, vote, own land, inherit. That's like a zero. Women are, you know, in patriarchy, women are a zero. And in this book, women are a zero. Everything is, the language is the black man. And I think it's supposed to incorporate. I think that's what patriarchy does. There's an assumption that women are incorporated in any notion that talks about, you know, man as like a generic term. But yeah, it's painful. It's painful that this, you know, brilliant, you know, person, this brilliant man, this political man, lived in an era and was raised in a culture where women were invisible. It's painful.
So with that notion, what are, right, clap it up for that, folks. What are some of the what would be some of the argument or the reasoning to pursue this theory or ideology for like the modern day person, right? Like why? If he excludes women and femmes and queer folk and trans folks and anyone that's not cishet black male, why should we read it? Which is you know, talk aloud, but also it's a theoretical question. Paula, I see you.
So I just kept going back again and again and again to the fact that this was written in 1952.
Yep.
Which is 70 years ago. And it was the high dominance of psychological theory. And he's taking on his own profession almost single-handedly. And I think it's just, I hear and you know, I understand all our historical critiques and reservations about what he's saying, but I also think his main project is to say this dominant ideology in which I've made my profession has it all wrong. And it has it all wrong because it refuses to acknowledge that the dominant model is white and racist, and everyone is stuck or pathological if they don't accept that model and or their place in that model. And I actually kept thinking oddly of, we read well, two things. One, we read the Brown Burke book, which was such a reclamation of psychology for all the communities we care about now. And I think it's kind of useful to put these two books together as two different moments in time, but actually kind of related, because they're trying to fix something really toxic in psychology in terms of the issues he raises. And then I also, in terms of what Anais just said about women, I think of Burke's book, Unbound.
Yep.
And how she'd worked so long and so hard to get to Me Too, and then it got co-opted by the national white conversation, and she was afraid she would lose what she had, but she found her place in it. But I think it's interesting to look at those then and now as part of what makes this an important point, and how extremely solitary he was when he wrote this.
Thank you so much, Paula. It's deeply, deeply insightful as always. And also the white national conversation, or the national white conversation. I'm about to take that because I've never heard that phrasing quite so beautifully. So I'm going to use that. And I also want to name that ultimately, yeah, Fanon is talking about like this psychological experience of power, right? And psychologically, how the Black man himself is exposing himself to like a worse sort of life and a worse sort of livelihood anytime they want to assimilate into the culture of power, which is white culture, right? That's sort of like assimilation into that. So absolutely, it's a moment in time where he's questioning sort of the very thing that got him there, you know? And simultaneously, it's painful to like go through, because in the notion, you understand that like in that psychological balance, certain identities or certain labels are othered in that, you know what I mean? So we have these things happening simultaneously. Wow, Amber Heard and the death of Me Too. That's a hot take on your part, Ron, but I'll let it pass, because I do understand that like sort of the notion of power dynamics being skewed and us naming like, well, what would it look like if Fanon had a deeper understanding of identity, if it didn't just stop at a certain kind of person? And I think that's a really, really important question for us to like mull in and be in. I also wanted to show you something, but I also want to name other things that are being put in the chat. Yes, we did, Barbara, to affirm this point, we did name that and ask that earlier, like if he was alive now, what would he feel around some of these other tendencies? And yeah, definitely naming how would he react to a bell hooks or someone of that stature, right? And yes, it is important to explore the vulnerable parts of Black manhood. And yet I would argue that this book is an academic, it's not that exploration. That's not what this is. But yes, that is true. And maybe perhaps the last chapter is where we sort of start to see him proclaim himself a little bit, and you can sort of see that self-identity happening. And then, yeah, it becomes the most vulnerable part of the book, the end. But for the most part, I think the argument we're naming here is that it's a critique on the assimilation to power in Blackness, as opposed to exploring Black manhood, right? Which would be a way more doper read for anybody. Yep, and if y'all aren't familiar, please, The Will to Change Men, Masculinity and Love by Bell Hooks. Really, really, really beautiful book. Also, you know, Bell doesn't write to please. And I think like, especially in The Will to Change Men, there's like some hot takes there that I modern day contemporary book lovers, ideologists, and Instagram influencers all argue over like, is Bell Hooks being too harsh? And I think asking those kind of questions mean that you probably need to read the book. You know what I mean? in sort of being in that notion. I wanted to share something with y'all really quick, but of course, if you have a thought or something, interrupt, unmute yourself, talk, but I'm gonna just look over here. So I was doing some research and I didn't know this, forgive my little baby brain, but there's a film, there's a black skin, white masked film. Are we familiar?
Oh.
Yeah, see, we didn't know this. So Ron, am I hosting, dear? Am I calling?
No, hang on, I'll make you host.
Take your time. And as Ron does that, I kind of wanted to watch the trailer together. Hadn't watched it yet. My research was only, I was like, let me not ruin my own reactions. Let me watch it with the group. So let's watch the trailer. I was interested at first to see like, how the hell are they gonna make this long ass, dry ass text a movie? Like, I'm not trying to watch that. And then I realized that there was a love story that they curated. And then I'm like, oh, we gotta watch. So let me pull up. I am now, let me share my screen because I am now host. Don't judge my tabs. You know, I watch a lot of TV. Okay, here we go. So, damn, yeah, this gotta be the one. This one's 1 minute, this one's 3 minutes. I kind of want to see the 3-minute one. Let's just see if it's actually true. Y'all can hear?
There's nothing on the screen.
There's a white screen, white
Trash.
screen.
All right, hold on. I'm not sure why that's happening. Share screen. Oh, okay, haha. Now you see things, right?
Mhm.
Excellent.
I do not come with timeless truths. My consciousness is not illuminated with ultimate radiances. Nevertheless, in complete composure, I think it would be good if certain things were said. These things I am going to say, not shout. For it is a long time since shouting has gone out of my life. So very long. I was born in 1925 in Martinique. I studied medicine in France and later specialized in psychiatry. When I was 27, I published my first book, Black Skin, White Mask. Why write this book? No one has asked before, especially those to whom it is directed. Well, I reply quite calmly. There are too many idiots in this world, and having said it, I have the burden of proving it.
The struggle between the master and the slave is a struggle for power, partly for who possesses the products of the slave's labor. This is the bit that interests Fanon, because he sees, of course, that the colonizer-colonized relationship is a struggle to the death, and indeed in his life he pursues it to the death. At the same time, he sees it is also a struggle by the slave to win recognition, and also the dependency of the master on the recognition from the slave. What Fanon says is, in the colonized colonial relationship, there is no recognition going on. And that's why Fanon is concerned that racism depersonalizes. It is a denial of recognition. It is the master saying, I do not see you at all.
All right. Wow. Very odd. Very odd trailer indeed. Let me see. I'm out of here. Yeah, I'm out of here. Okay. That's not what it said the description was on YouTube, but I am glad we looked at it together. The YouTube description says it tells a story. Yeah, Frantz Fanon was born in Martinique, educated in Paris, worked in Algeria. The story of how his love affected his ideology around race. So I don't know where this trailer came from, but it clearly is a cut trailer. I don't know if that trailer made you want to watch the movie or if it made you say, you know what, I'm good on all content for this. But what I will name is that I do like the idea of a text that's difficult to read or dry, having sort of talking heads and people that you can sort of turn to, right? As opposed to depending on yourself to sort of dissect whatever the theory is. So I appreciate that. Go off and watch it this weekend, y'all. No, I'm dragging it. But I do also want to name really quickly, hold on, let me pull this down. Okay. We keep going back to this essential question. Why? Why do we need to read it? And I was wondering if anyone had any thoughts around what that is. Why is it important? Why are we reading it? We're a book club of predominantly Black and brown folks who understand what it means to like navigate the world through various identity, right? Some of us arguing some of the identities in our group are a little bit more complex than what Fanon even could think. So why is it important to read this? Is it not?
You know, I think it is, as far as Fanon being one of those touchstones in the culture that people and scholars often reference. Like I said earlier, I had not read him, but I always heard his name, and it just felt like, you know, so there. I mean, there are many people who fit into that category, whether it's Bell Hooks, or Toni Morrison, or James Baldwin. I'm sure in that clip, I believe Stuart Hall was filmed, and he's a well-known scholar of particularly Afro-Caribbean culture. So he's another, Edward Said might be like more Black people, the Middle East kind of area. So there are all these names that come up that, people, and I hesitate, I don't want to put people in quotes, because they're oftentimes more academics than, and not to say that academics aren't people.
Aren't people. They're more academic than human.
They do have a different language, and they do have a different, their goals are different than people who are not academics. So.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. So, and I think what you're naming is that value, that ideology is upheld in those communities, in that circles. And it's important when we talk about sort of new school contemporary ideology or socio-psychology, particularly in Black body, right? Like, how can we not at least give tribute or acknowledge Fanon in some way? So I appreciate that.
And it is possible that within the academy, there is more critical views of Fanon now. But, I don't exist in an academy, so I don't know what those conversations sound like.
Right. I don't know what the direct criticism is, but I think like the overall response is probably like Bell Hooks's work, right? And like other folks.
I think the criticism would be patriarchy.
Yeah.
And, just that sort of relentless centering of men in his text, or maybe not centering men, but excluding women, which is kind of the same thing.
Which is like, maybe not tomato, but a little bit of tomato. And I do think that Okay, now I've been holding it in long enough. I'm gonna go nuts now. I saw the movie Men this weekend. So you keep using the phrase like centering men, and I'm like, oh my gosh. Men is the new film out, A24 Productions, filmed by Alex Garland, who also directed Ex Machina, if anyone's a fan. Oscar Isaac, it's great movies to stream over the weekend or when the weather gets, a little bit colder outside, but they're really amazing films. And A24 is like the big film company at the moment. Like everyone is into A24. They have tons of movies. Ex Machina was great. Thank you, Liliana. Oscar Isaac is so good in that, but now that this becomes a different conversation. Yes, he is. Stop it, Rod. So then what I'm naming in the film.
Paula, what was the name of the film again? Men?
Men, yeah.
Okay.
This is the movie that just came out. I would love to watch the trailer, but I already saw the movie, so we shouldn't get into it. But it's starring Rory Kinnear, if you're familiar with his work. He's a great dude. A young woman goes away on a weekend to recalibrate after having a super traumatic experience happen to her, which you see it in the trailer, the experience. Something happens and her spouse ends up falling off a building, and you kind of like see him, you see her in the trailer look at him, and then he falls to his death. Oh, you pulled it up? I heard the music. That's why I was like, oh.
That was a commercial, I think.
Oh, okay, yeah, for the trailer. So long story short, and we can watch the trailer together, but long story short, she ends up going away for the weekend to kind of recalibrate after having this horrible experience. She's in the British countryside somewhere, in the English countryside, rather, I have no idea where. And there's a town with these men in it, and she doesn't notice, but you notice in the trailer, all the men have the same face, Rory Kinnear's face. And all the men in this town are played by one person. And the film itself is like a wonderful, wonderful exploration of like misogyny, patriarchy, and the roles that folks think they have to take on. And I would even argue like motherhood and all these other things, but now I'm going crazy. And I really think it was such a great book to read while such a great movie to watch while struggling through this process of not seeing myself in this work that we're reading, even though I know in Black Body and in theory it is connected to me, but I couldn't place myself. It wasn't as relatable. It was harder for me to, I think Anais had like named this sentiment, to like revisit the book at times, because I'm like, he's just writing on about himself. So it was just a great movie to watch, and I'm gonna push this movie hardcore. You all should watch Men. It's a horror film, but if you're not into horror, like, back up. But I really, really would be curious.
Do you want to watch the
Come on, y'all want to watch the trailer, please? You don't see how excited I am? Watch it with me. Let's do it, Ron. Woo! Oh, your computer's nice, Ron.
I don't play around.
Oh.
Hi. Mrs. Marlowe, yes?
Harper, yes.
Yeah, come in.
The words I have to say.
It's a beautiful house. Will it just be you staying? Or?
Excuse me?
Mrs. Marlowe?
No.
Until you give your love, there's nothing more that we can do.
Gone?
Yeah, it was delicious.
No. Mustn't do that. Forbidden fruit.
Oh, God, sorry.
I'm joking.
Oh.
You're tormented.
Feels more like.
Haunted.
Yeah. Something happened. My husband went upstairs to our balcony and let himself go.
You must wonder why you drove him to it.
I didn't drive him to it.
I think to be true. Just give him the chance to apologize. He'd still be alive.
What? A man followed me out of the woods. He was stalking me.
What makes you say that?
I saw him twice.
Twice. I don't know if he saw you once. Okay. You, Holly. I'll see. Must feel an awful sense.
You wait for me.
What are you?
I'm sorry. I just got really scared because I heard the music again, and I feel like I just finished watching that movie. But the trailer doesn't, A24 does a great job of not giving you much in the trailer, but I promise you, it's such a,
Hang on.
commercials, Liberty Mutual. It's such an interesting commentary, and Alex Garland sort of does this. He's like a contemporary storyteller around sort of hot takes that are happening in our Western socioeconomic state, United States. And I feel like talking about feminism is one of those things that a lot of male directors have stayed away from post Me Too, and like understanding the role that Hollywood plays in it. So it is quite, and maybe I'm just like geeking right now, but it is quite a commentary on how we live in a world where men are centered. Yeah, it is. It does look a little scary, but they tried to make it more scary via the trailer than it actually is. Like it's a really good story. Everyone's like, same. It's not that scary. But what is scary is the notion that I think that we live in a world where even the conversations around decentering men are still around men, and how like, yes, not all men, but very much all men. And what if we understood the world through the lens that most men are the same, right? Which is like, you see the symbolic thing of the dude with the many faces. Y'all seen Rory Kinnear? He's a good actor. You liked him. You liked him in that other thing you saw him in. He's very good.
Yeah, he's a good
So,
actor.
yeah. And I think it's, I like when men take on the notion like, oh shit, what if we're all the same? You know, because I think often the argument is not all men, not all men, not all men, not all men, you know, and that doesn't seem to necessarily get us to a space of accountability in certain conversations. So let's talk about something else, because I could do it all night. Yes, Christopher.
How's it going? I'm new here, and I know this is the last meeting, but I saw that y'all were reading Fanon, and I was really interested to hear what y'all had to say. So I'm very excited and thankful for all of your comments. Just what you were saying just now, it makes me think of there's this new album by Denzel Curry, which I can't stop listening to.
You're always welcome, Christopher. Keep going.
And the first song on that album, I think, is really interesting, because I think the notion that we're talking about in terms of all men and men going, oh, maybe it is all men, or maybe this is a pattern of misogyny and patriarchy that is internalized. I think that first song on Denzel Curry's new album, called "Melt My Eyes, See Your Future," is really important, because it doesn't try to like forgive or like excuse all men, but is like, I've fucked up, and like I've internalized misogyny and patriarchy, and there are some lines that are on there that I think are really reflective and very honest and vulnerable, but not in a way of like, yeah, I'm a part of the process, but actually like, this is one of the first instances in which I've heard a man very explicitly take responsibility and apologize for the objectification of women specifically. Whereas I think in other places, it's kind of like, yeah, patriarchy, but then like, there's no like responsibility or like acknowledgement of harm. It's just kind of like, yeah, we're all victims, even us men. But right. So what I really like about this first song is the very explicit like apologizing from this individual, which I think is exciting, at least for me as a listener, because then it's kind of this person who's more mainstream. I just wonder what the effects of that are. And so, yeah, I'll keep it short. But otherwise, that came to mind immediately when I was thinking about what you were saying.
Thank you so much for sharing. And no, you don't have to keep it short. That was brilliant. Continue. Yeah. And I love the fact that we're sharing music as well. Sorry, keep going, Ron.
No, that's all right. You know, what's interesting about that point, though, is that we're asking white people to do anti-racism work, but the idea of men doing sort of anti or doing feminist work doesn't seem to resonate. It can't grab a foothold in the society, whereas, I mean, anti-racism seems, it definitely hasn't grabbed a foothold in the society to the extent where, white people are, getting online to do anti-racism work. But that shooting today in Texas, is about, masculinity. We need to really address, we men really need to address our role in, as Christopher was saying, or Christopher's reference to Denzel Curry, was saying, like, we're not addressing our role in what it takes to really end misogyny, anti-women behavior.
Yep.
I think it's so very easy for people to disentangle themselves from any sort of culpability when it comes to that, because even with the anti-racism work, it's mostly symbolic. Like when we were talking about, well, should we read Fanon? He was on the list. Those reading lists in June 2020 that were going around that everyone needed to read. Once you got past Robert DiAngelo and Abraham
say that. You better say that, Greg.
And the Fanon was on there. Whether people actually read him or not, I can't account for it. I'm not looking over people's shoulders whether they're reading this stuff. But even that was symbolic. It's like, okay, yeah, we're going to do anti-racist work, which even now, the diversity, inclusion initiatives and everything, many companies still have that. I don't think that means we're getting any closer to an anti-racist society, which goes back to the quote that, Paula, you pulled from the book earlier of the last chapter about turning our back on the inhuman voices. It sounds very nice, but it's like, he's not demanding white people to disavow their whiteness, which is really the end game here. If you wanted to end white supremacy, you need to turn your back on whiteness as a white person.
Right.
So as far as as far as pro-feminist work goes, you're even further removed from that, because there is no foothold when you have situations like the Depp Heard trial, whereas there's this massive campaign to paint her as this Looney Tune, and Depp is being upheld as this unfairly maligned man.
Yeah.
Like literally a campaign. Like YouTube is recommending you videos even if you've never clicked on anything.
Yes.
All pro-Depp stuff.
All streaming sites have brought all his movies back to the forefront. I could watch Pirates of the Caribbean right now.
Yes, they've been airing them on TV too.
I even saw an ad for Blow. You know that film with Penelope Cruz?
Yes,
and
I love Blow. Yeah.
What the hell year is this that they're trying to get me to watch Blow? But
yeah, but either way, it's even harder than for something like feminist work, because it's like men are you can very conveniently remove yourselves from any culpability with that, because there is no groundswell moment. It's not like with the mass shooting where everyone has to pretend for a second they're going to do something about it. Or it's not about George Floyd being killed. You're going to pretend you're going to do something about it for a minute. With this, it's like, okay, we're going to pretend it doesn't exist. We're going to pretend that feminists just hate men, and that's all it is man bashing,
Right. Yep.
Oh, and if you really want to go deeper into this, the complete antithesis to a Denzel Curry, which I haven't heard the album yet, but I'm sure it's very thoughtful. I couldn't help but think of the fact that Kendrick's, talk about learning from your past mistakes, the Kendrick album.
Totally.
And how he deals with this homophobia by just being more homophobic.
More in it. So, I agree. Yeah, totally. While Christopher was talking about sort of, not hearing another man not only take a sense of accountability and apologizing, but also removing himself from that idea of like, well, it's patriarchy and we're all victims of it. I thought of Kendrick immediately because I'm like, yeah, that's sort of what's happening in Kendrick Lamar's new album. We're talking music, folks. We're talking hip hop. We're talking some of like the contemporary stories of our time and like what's very popular in youth culture at this moment. And I'm lying, I think, if I'd say youth culture, because I think it's like a pivotal moment for hip hop in a certain way, the way these albums are dropping against each other. And we're also in a summer of like the female rap artist takeover. We are embarking on a summer where like most of the pop radio hits and hip hop Billboard charts are women. It's not men. So it's a really, really, really interesting, whatever this is, like meeting space of like all of these different mediums and art forms finding each other. Because I think, we're asking like, well, how would Frantz Fanon sort of respond to some of these ideologies now? I think it's also important to name that like we are in a culture of these ideologies. It's in our music. It's in the popular conversations that are taking over our YouTube, right? It's in like America's obsession with this trial, with the DV trial between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. we're sort of living in it. We're living in the responses and in the product of maybe not naming the multitudes of identity that people have to face in order to navigate a cishet, white, patriarchal, capitalist world, right? So, woo, lots of terms, lots of things happening. Yeah, can't listen to the album. I tried. Yeah, Alexis, yeah, you could definitely talk about, because I think it's similar to when Anais sits here and names for us, like, it was hard for me to revisit and to go back and to kind of care about myself in whatever this person is explaining in this moment. So I don't know, Alexis, if you want to
which album? Kendrick's
just dropped a new album this week.
Denzel's?
No, Kendrick. She said she couldn't listen to it. Yeah, Kendrick's. Yeah. And you could.
I haven't listened to the new album.
Yeah, I mean, it's like sonically very good, of course, but it's just, yeah, he's revisiting. It's like when Dave Chappelle is like, hey, I'm gonna say another trans joke. That's what it feels like. That's what the new Kendrick album feels like. It's like, whoa, here are all these things that were affecting us as a society, and I'm just gonna repeat this shit to make the irony of art, as opposed to maybe not doing it. So again, not all men, but like, is it all men? Right. And I, again, go back to watch the film, but.
And plus, if you're in those masculine spaces and something crazy is said and you don't challenge it, are you just as culpable? Are you just as guilty?
Mm-hmm.
How do folks feel about that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think you are.
Can I ask a question?
Please. Hi.
Hey, I'm just curious because, I listen to a lot of the music that you guys are talking about.
The show.
Yeah, and I've watched Annihilation and Next Mind. I plan on watching Men, but I haven't.
Oh, you watched Annihilation? Dope. I never got to see it, but that's good.
It was good. It was visually, it was very good. But yeah, I'm curious, like, because I am a cis, heterosexual Black man, and I'm curious, like, a lot of this stuff goes over my head. I'm trying to, be more cognizant of a lot of the things that, women specifically or queer, non-gender conforming type of people talk about. And even still, like, I try to familiarize myself with a lot of the literature and, sit at the, sit in the conversation and try to just hear. But even still, when I go back to, listening to Kendrick and, Denzel Curry or, Black Star, they have a new album, which is really good as well.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, it's just like a lot of this, like, I'm not getting, like, when I hear it, to me, it doesn't sound, at least on first listen, it doesn't sound like something that, could be considered, I guess misogynist or, centering men. So I'm curious to know, like, what exactly is being said in these things that are, categorized as misogynist or like anti-woman or just, harmful or, I guess, offensive.
Would a man like to take that on? I'll ask the questions to the group.
I haven't listened to the latest Kendrick album, so I can't really comment on it, but it's been receiving like crazy good reviews. Like you would think, like, so I'm going to assume that misogyny and homophobia is not a theme throughout the album, the way it has been received, the way Kendrick's album has been received.
I don't know what, I want to challenge that notion for a second, because when, this is for all of us, not like for Ron to answer, when in the history of hip hop or when whatever has like homophobia or like anti-woman sentiment meant that it wasn't a good album? Like in hip hop theory and ideology, those notions actually don't go together, right? Like you can be anti, the more anti, the better the album, right? Like that's actually a history of how we understand hip hop. So I hear you, but I want to name that its reviews are because it's a great album and it tells like a good story, but we have to, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. There's a squirrel on my window. I was like, what the hell? He's right over there. I'm very scared. We have to understand that like misogyny and homophobia and all these things are like can be a huge part of how hip hop expresses itself and tells its story from time to time. And artists like Kendrick aren't exuded from that because they have a higher consciousness, you know, like Common himself can be homophobic at times or anti-woman at times, you know? Oh my gosh. Keep going. That I really do.
I'm just wondering, Alexis has said that she had listened to the album and she couldn't listen to it and it was unbearable. And I was just wondering maybe if Alexis could share a little bit about, you know, what was your experience and how you experienced the misogyny?
I'm also sorry to cut you off, but also even going back to the book, I'd love to know particularly what points in the book woman, because I just
for the book, because the book is probably more general and this is like a deeper, granular sort of conversation we're about to get into. For the book, what we're named is that Fanon writes strictly, and we've named that this is a product of the time because he's in the 50s and the 60s, but he's writing Black men, he speaks of the liberation, only Black men. He doesn't use the word woman. He doesn't include any, daughters, it's like Black men's sons, Black men's sons. So earlier.
No misogyny. He's not like overtly, criticizing women or anything. He has just excluded women from this narrative.
Right, which is misogynistic. That exclusion is misogynistic, right? Like, yeah. We don't want to say no misogyny because I think the argument we're naming is that not having it is.
Otherwise, you should have named the book Black Male Skin.
Black dude skin, white dude faces. And again, that's more about a time. It's a time thing, less of like a direct like, oh, these are the ways in which you're misogynist. I think we understand that of the times when psychoanalysts and psychologists wrote of human and man, they wrote just in that way of man, and women and other folks are constantly excluded in that sort of psychologist language, So that's where that came from. Alexis, I saw you unmute yourself. Please feel free.
Yeah, I just want to jump in just real quick and also just say that I may have misrepresented myself in listening to Kendrick's album because I wasn't able to finish it. Like I wasn't drawn into it the way that I was to Kill a Butterfly. So it was just hard for me to like I don't really know what his direction was, and there was a lot of anger in the album or the songs that I heard, or at least the ones that are most popular, that I didn't feel like was Kendrick. So it just felt like I had to be in a different mind space to listen to it. So I just haven't been able to finish it. So I can't speak to the misogyny in that album or the homophobia. But what I will say is that if you even compare the conversation that the compassion rather that Fanon had about the Black man and his relationship versus the lack of compassion that he had for Black women and their relationships when it comes to white men and white women, you can see that there's a lack thereof. Like he's literally saying it like these Black women are cunning and they don't want to be with they don't want to be with Black men anyway, and like it's kind of women's fault for I don't have the book on me, but it's really in that last 5 pages where he's sitting there like, this is why Black men are struggling so hard because we have to compete with these white men who are taking out white women who don't really want us anyway. Taking out Black women who don't really want us anyway.
Yeah.
And don't let them be mulatto because then that's the end of it. She ain't even seeing you like. And I was just like, whoa, like, who are these women that he's dealing with? And then I'm like, who wants to be with somebody who doesn't even see his counterpart as human and checking for these, white women and looking for white women to make them feel human again? Like, that's literally what he says in the next chapter. So
he has a white wife.
Right, but I mean, look, people make their decisions. I don't know how his relationship with his wife is affected by her color of her skin. I don't want to say that because I know my prejudices or my biases, so I don't even want to.
But what you're naming, I do want to, and I appreciate that, but we can't. You as a Black woman, also those prejudices and biases are products of the society that we live in, my dear. Like you're not pulling that out of left field because you're crazy. You know what I mean? So I think it's also important to name that, like, even in that understanding, you still have a grace for him because you're like, well, he's being misogynistic, but like, I don't want to take my own views, right? And like go against him. Something to consider, but thank you for being smart.
No. I don't know his situation, and then I know that sometimes, especially in spaces where you are the only, like, are you supposed to not date anybody because no one is your same race? Like, you know, maybe you might see a woman who is of another race, and she just happens to check all the boxes except for, you know, being a counterpart of your own race. So I don't know his situation, but I feel like the way he was talking about that, the young man who was writing about his loneliness and isolation being in school, like I felt like that was him telling his story, but he didn't have the same compassion for a Black woman who might also be under certain pressures by her family and her situation, where she may also be rejected by a Black man or dark-skinned Black man or non-mulatto. Right. And unable to date and be be loved, you know, like a white woman or whatever, if that's the marker.
If that's the marker that he's setting up, and that's what you're naming,
right?
He's like having that compassion, but not for Black women in this instance. It's literally using it against him. The same thing.
Right. Like I would challenge you to read the book, like read those two chapters again and see like how he's naming it, or you know, even ask yourself if you feel like that might be something that may be a challenge for you. And I'm not calling you out because, like I said, I have my own prejudices, right? But a challenge for you to maybe see the Black woman's perspective about how she's been able to relate to men, and also something that I brought up, and I'm gonna leave it at this because I don't want it to be, you know, my show or whatever. But what I talked about the first session we had, I challenged Black men to identify themselves with outside of Black womanhood, like who are you as a man? What does manhood look like without a woman? Because women have had to do that and bring their humanity in for a long time to declare their humanity, when men have historically valued a woman based off of who she marries or who she aligns herself with. So I'll just leave it at that.
Absolutely. Leave it at that or come back for more. Thank you, Alexis, for your insight. I also want to say this is a gem, folks. Even if hip hop is not your vibe, I promise you that this is a lovely album. It's a great little thing to have in the background while you prepare a meal or prepare your bath for the evening. I don't know what kind of luxurious lives you all lead, but thank you so much, Gabe. For anyone who doesn't want to pay Luminary for the Black Star album, we have that link right here. Feel free to click it. Make sure you do it before we finish book club, or else you won't be able to get that little chat. Okay. Y'all have brought up so many amazing points and notions, nothing that none of us didn't already know before, but it's part of the reason why I love book club, for us to be able to come to a space and say, oh, wow, that kind of went right over my head. Can y'all tell me where that is? Can y'all show that to me? Or someone saying, wow, I've actually never heard or given it that lens. And look, you got 2 live album reviews in one session. This is, and two movies and the book. This has been a good session. Like y'all are coming out gold here. With the 20 minutes that we have left, also, if you have a Luminary account, spread that, but Ron also put that in the chat if you wanted to click on that and use your account. What I wanted to name in the 20 minutes that we have left, I guess, is that clearly, while we have our criticisms of like where certain identities fall within this ideology, I think we also as a group can name and acknowledge the importance of this work and sort of where it leads us, right? So after reading or having a bit of an understanding, what Black ideologists would you recommend someone read after reading this book? You're like, okay, you got that version. I think some of, and it doesn't have to be, it doesn't actually have to be a Black ideologist. I don't know why I said that. It can be anyone. What sort of, who would you recommend someone read this book to? Because I'm thinking like someone, I think Paula mentioned earlier, Brene Brown, right? or Tarana, or both of them. I can't remember who, but like, who would you recommend folks read after getting off of this?
I'm thinking from a anti-colonial perspective. So she's not necessarily Black, but what she writes about affects Blackness, and that's Harsha Walia, and she wrote Border and Rule. And that's like kind of the go-to. And it came out last year, but it's already quickly being the most cited in certain circles because it tackles anti-Blackness, anti-indigeneity, anti-Latinx, all through the lens of incarceration and immigration. And it's anti-colonial. So I feel like Fanon is just the foundation for all this. It's when we critique writers, it's not always from a negative perspective. It's, critique is often generative, it's positive. Not that he's here to receive it, right? But it's not always meant to tear down. It's just to point out, okay, there are gaps here, and these are the people who've now come after him, and they're filling those gaps. And I think Harsha Walia is a good example of that.
Yep. Thank you. Critique is often generative. Get that tatted on your wrist, folks. That was a.
Can you put that in the chat, Greg?
Put it in the chat, Greg. Thank you. That was a Greg direct. We also have in the chat, someone said Adrienne Marie Brown. Excellent, right? Let's go. You can learn more about Adrienne Marie Brown. She's also really funny to follow on Instagram. It's not heavy. She's literally just like, come to my page for a laugh. It's really good. Oh, okay. Sorry, Christopher, I'm about to call on you, but I see that Alexis is naming. No, I want to hear from Black men about anti-Blackness patriarchy. Right. It has to be a Black man. Right. So I don't know if I want to hear from Black men about anti-Blackness and patriarchy, but I do understand, like, I am curious, like, is there a healthy intake? Is there a cishet Black man that has like a healthy intake on this sort of relationship? So maybe I would want to read it. But in my mind, they all sound like Frantz Fanon. That's why I'm like, I'm on to the next one. Border and Rule. Okay, that's the book. Christopher, please unmute yourself. Share.
Yeah, well, Adrienne Marie Brown's Instagram is very funny.
So funny.
Yeah, I have two names, which are perhaps more contemporary actually than Fanon, certainly not 70 years ago. And I think perhaps even more, I guess, inclusive. One is Achille Mbembe. Though I don't exactly have a real big grasp on his work. But another one that I think is really interesting is Chakanetsa Mavunga, who writes about, I can write these names in the chat, who writes specifically about the tsetse fly, and also how like the production of, I guess, racialized bodies as like quote unquote pests, and how we understood like pesthood. And so I think that also kind of brings into the conversation our relationship, not just among human beings, but also among animals, and how animals themselves are perhaps entities, which I think goes into all this decolonial work. I would type them in the chat too. Thank you. Yeah.
Oh my God, thank you. I'm giving you, I wish I could do that noise that people used to make with their thumbs. Like, that is so real, right? The way we understand like animals, pests, and what does that look like in non-white body in that relationship. Super, super interesting. Yes, all of these links are in the chat, folks, so make sure you're clicking them. Don't wait till the end because you might not get it in time, which is what I always mess up. Any other thoughts? Yep.
I was at an event once and somebody mistook me for Mbembe.
Really? Did you write it out or you were like, nah, it's not.
He was there.
Oh, okay.
So I could only go but so far with it.
Right. I'm like, was it for the drink menu? Because come on, Ron, you had to sit it out. No, that's so good. I one time thought I went to the Schomburg and I was waiting to watch Zadie Smith speak. Her and Chimamanda were there together, and I thought, like, I don't know, something happened. And someone was like, Sadie. And I was like, oh my goodness, this lady thinks I'm Sadie. But no, Zadie Smith was right behind me. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. Not me. This was the 20s, Paula in her 20s. That's a fun Paula. We don't know her no more. I want to name, I do want to take a minute to acknowledge, though, if you're able to scroll back more up in the chat, you'll see that Ron has put the link for our next book, Juliet Takes a Breath by Gabby Rivera, presented with the Casita Maria Book Club. That's going to be on Tuesdays during our time. No, I'm kidding. Book club time is everyone's time. It's going to be on Tuesdays, and that's going to rock all the way until June 28th. So that'll be a nice book for the summer. I also want to name that this same author, Gabby Rivera, also wrote America Chavez, the new Captain America. So if you want to learn more about that, Marvel is moving in that direction. If you saw this latest Marvel film, then you'll see that like this person is a character. So just shout out to Gabby Rivera for, being a part of Marvel franchise and redefining America. What do you say, Rod?
She also just became a mom, I believe.
She did, yes. Gabby just had a baby.
Something.
She had a baby last week, folks.
Yeah.
And she's doing good. Her baby's beautiful. Gabby's the homie. And yeah, just shout out to being brilliant.
She's from the Bronx.
Period.
She lives out in California now, I believe.
Yep. And if you go to Casita Maria in person, you'll see a lot of different, they have like a lot of flyers and stuff for her book that's out right now and for the America Chavez comic. If you're into comics or you have someone in your family who is, tell them to chat with you about it. It's a very cool take on identity. Any other thoughts?
I want to go back to a point that Greg made earlier about this sort of post-George Floyd, Black Lives Matter.
Performative sort of thing. Yeah.
And I'm just, I tried to do a quick search, and of course, when you do things fast, you can't really find what you want, but I was just trying to find some of those lists just to see some of the names on them that may have been problematic from that time. Because it is true, people were just sort of rushing into that space, just listing books randomly. And I tend not to have book lists like ever, because I just prefer people, make their own decisions or come here. But it is interesting. I wonder how many of those books, if we really sort of examine them, would be problematic.
Yeah, like inherently have their own racism. I always felt like Robin DiAngelo's book was inherently a little racist, but the whole DOE didn't believe me. So I was just kind of like,
a lot of money.
She made a lot of money. And a part of that was the Department of Education having several districts across the board saying, you know what, our families need this book. Our communities need this book. So it's like a very smart partnership on her part. But also I'm like, okay, New York City, with like a very small population of students who don't exist in a predominantly Black or non-white body. Like, I don't understand how this book got so much of everyone's attention and resources right around the time the pandemic was hitting the most, like teachers were expected to like kind of get into this to address the city's mission for racial equity across the board for the Department of Education. So I feel like that was a time where we were using people's time, money, mental, and resources on a book that really was kind of racist, So that's just my opinion. The name of the book is Robin DiAngelo. Let me write it down. Robin DiAngelo. What's it called?
White Fragility.
I was gonna say I'm white.
And it was written for white people. So why would they be using it in a public school where 90% of the students are students of color?
Right.
Now, so stupid.
Right. Now, of course, certain teachers of certain demographics need certain trainings to allow them to be able to like build better relationships with students. Sure. But I think they took that issue for 2 or 3 schools in a certain district, right? Like maybe somewhere along 66th Street or something like that, and made it a citywide mandate, which is really what sucks, because then the majority of our communities don't get the trainings or the support that or the majority of our educators don't get the training or the support they need to navigate these really specific communities that need really specific kind of help, That's my tangent, because, I used to work for the DOE, but that's just it. I always felt like that book was mad racist. Greg, I see you were going to say something.
No, I always unmuted without realizing, but she had a follow-up, by the way, in case you missed that banger.
Oh, man, what was that banger?
It's called Nice Racism.
Wow.
I'm not even joking. It's called Nice Racism. And it's about how progressive white people perpetuate racial harm. That's the subtitle.
Wow. She must feel very self-righteous at Thanksgiving every dinner. Nice Racism. You guys ever go to a comedy show or maybe you've seen this on TV where the comic is so self-deprecating that they start to bomb and you're like, this isn't funny. You're you're just being really shitty to yourself, is sort of how I associate her work, and it's particularly White Fragility in that book. I'm like, she just wants to beat white people with their own guilt until they are better. Like, I don't feel, this doesn't feel like it's hitting the way it should, but I don't know how well
they left those books wound up uncreased on a lot of stoops, and I feel like a lot of boxes and free libraries around the city. There were a lot of them were purchased. It doesn't mean they were read. Not that it would have been helpful if they were read anyway.
Yeah, and I mean, even when I worked in the schools and I saw the resistance from some teachers and having to read and engage, you know, and yes, we're talking like young white teachers in their 30s, you know, like my age range, who were super resistant to the idea of like having to read how to be less racist with students. So shout out to you, New York City, always doing your part. And if you're someone that read these books with your community, you enjoyed them, please, like, feel free to be like, Paula, I don't agree with you, but I don't agree with you. 7 minutes left on the docket. I want us to keep talking, you know, for the 7 minutes, because I'm not going to see you. And then you're going to be like, damn, I miss her. So I want to name, to that point, Ron, earlier too, like, do you think it's helpful? I don't know, if we're clearly a group of folks who believe in the power of stories, who believe in the power of books and what it means to, like, how it influences how we approach each other. Are there any of these books on those lists that we would have deemed as helpful?
I'm not a big list person, so I see the list come out, but I really don't follow lists. So I can't tell you, like, you know, I was urging people, around that time, we read Corregidora by Gail Jones. And I would much rather people read fiction that deals with novels that deal with issues of racism than nonfiction books about racism. You know, read Sula. That's how America operates. I mean, that is the American narrative in Sula or Corregidora or any of, you know, of course you can read Baldwin, but you can read like somebody like Walter Mosley.
Yes.
I mean, Walter Mosley's books are framed through a Black perspective that is kind of bracketed by whiteness. Black people live a certain place because of white people. They shop in certain places because of white people. If they fight in the war, you know, they're in segregated battalions. So that's, I mean, that won't teach you a lesson, but I think it will. I mean, in a book club, it will, because we're here to kind of, you know, guide people and just have greater conversations about books. But, you know, the book that kind of led me down this literary path years ago was called Billy by Albert French. And it's a book about a 10-year-old Black boy who kills a 14-year-old white girl by mistake. And he is sentenced to death because of that. It's fiction, although it's fiction, but it is based on something that actually happened. And that book has been, books by like Ernest Gaines, A Lesson Before Dying, you know, for me, books like that are more important than, you know, having a scholar tell us, you know, what we kind of already know about racism and how we can undo it. But, you know, maybe everyone doesn't know it, so I'm not mad at them.